Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating question about the limits of international immunity. We hear about immunity all the time in the news, right? Usually it's wrapped up in high-stakes diplomacy. But what actually happens when a regular, everyday crime happens right in our own backyard? Well, we're going to focus squarely on a definitive, game-changing ruling from the Supreme Court of the Philippines. It's the landmark case of Liang v. People, decided on January 28, 2000. So let's dive into this really provocative question. Does working for an international organization actually put you above the law? You know, the pop culture myth. We see it in movies all the time. A character flashes a diplomatic passport and boom, suddenly the local police can't touch them, literally no matter what they've done. It's like the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. But in reality, the law is way more nuanced. Working for an international body doesn't automatically mean host country rules just vanish. Take a look at this quote because it perfectly hits the nail on the head. Basically, immunity exists to shield these organizations from political pressure. The real mystery, though, is whether that shield covers absolutely everything an employee does. The whole point is to ensure these organizations can operate smoothly. It's about protecting the job itself, not making the organization its own little sovereign nation. Okay, let's look at Section 1, the rule of generality, which gives us the baseline of criminal law. Before we can talk about breaking the rules of local jurisdiction, we really need to establish what those rules actually are. The crucial point here is generality. Under normal circumstances, if you are inside the territory of the Philippines, you are bound by its laws, period. No exceptions. Whether you're a citizen living there permanently or a foreigner just visiting, the state has the power to define and punish crimes committed right there within its borders. However, there are a few established exceptions in international law, things like sovereigns, chiefs of state, and specific diplomats like ambassadors. They aren't subject to local criminal laws. It's a very well-established rule. But look closely at who is not on this list. You won't see employees of international banks or staff of international organizations anywhere on there, and that omission sets the stage for our story. Moving on to Section 2, the case of Jeffrey Liang, an economist in court. Let's travel back to 1994. Meet Jeffrey Liang. He wasn't some powerful ambassador, he was an economist for the Asian Development Bank, or ADB. And the crime he was charged with? It wasn't some grand international espionage. He was charged with 2 counts of grave oral defamation against a fellow ADB worker, Joyce Cabal. It was basically a routine workplace dispute that crossed the line into a criminal charge. So the local court actually issues a warrant for his arrest. They set his bail at 2,400 pesos per count. He gets arrested, and then he's released to the custody of the ADB's security officer. Now, at this exact moment, it just looks like a completely standard criminal procedure, right? Just a normal case moving forward in the local courts. But literally a day later, the plot twists. The Department of Foreign Affairs, or DFA, intervenes. They send a protocol letter straight to the judge claiming Liang is completely immune from the legal process, citing Section 45 of the ADB Headquarters Agreement. And based solely on this one letter from the executive branch, the trial court judge just dismisses the 2 criminal cases without even notifying the prosecution. What follows is absolute procedural ping-pong. As you can see, the case bounced back and forth between dismissals and reinstatements. The prosecution obviously fought back, arguing they were totally denied due process. A higher court actually agreed and ordered the arrest warrant enforced again. And so, Liang pushed this case all the way up to the Supreme Court, betting his entire defense on this idea of absolute immunity. Which brings us to Section 3, diplomatic versus functional immunity, and knowing the difference. To understand why the lower courts were so incredibly confused, you have to look at these 2 very different legal concepts. Liang thought he had the immunity on the left, diplomatic, status-based immunity. That's the one that protects an ambassador no matter what they're doing. But as an international bank economist, he actually only had the immunity on the right, functional immunity. It's task-based and comes from specific treaties. You can really just think of functional immunity as a highly specific shield. It only protects you while you are doing your actual job. It is a functional shield for official tasks, definitely not a blank check for personal misconduct. If you commit private acts or crimes that have absolutely nothing to do with your job, that shield drops and you are fully subject to local courts. So what about that DFA letter? Well, it turns out it wasn't a magic wand to just end the trial. The Supreme Court clarified that a letter from the DFA is just a preliminary executive determination. It is not automatically binding on the courts. The courts actually retain the power, and the duty, really, to look into the facts of the claim themselves. Now for Section 4, the Supreme Court ruling and the limits of the shield. So the Supreme Court of the Philippines steps in to give the final word. They had to decide one core question. Is slandering a coworker part of an ADB economist's official banking duties? I mean, when you frame it like that, the answer seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? They had to figure out if uttering defamatory words was actually protected by that shield. This brings us to a really important legal term, ultra vires. In plain English, it means acts performed outside of your official duties or authority. The Supreme Court decisively ruled that committing a crime like defamation is ultra vires. Slandering a colleague isn't necessary for a bank to function. It's way outside the job description, and therefore Liang was absolutely not immune from prosecution for this specific act. The court laid out these really clear steps to prove that just yelling immunity doesn't automatically stop a trial. Step 1, determine if the act is official or ultra vires. Step 2, the trial court actually has to examine the facts in a hearing rather than just automatically dismissing the case when they see a DFA letter. They have to check the facts to make sure local citizens still get their day in court. But it's important to know that this shield does still work when it's supposed to. Later cases, like Westfall v. Loxon in 2024, reaffirmed the Liang standard. In that case, someone tried to sue ADB committee members over a hiring decision. The court checked the facts and said, hey, unlike slander, evaluating a job candidate actually is an officially integral function, so in that instance, the immunity held up perfectly. As we wrap up this explainer, the Liang case leaves us with a really powerful takeaway. A fancy job title is not a license to commit a crime, and local courts definitely hold the power to drop that shield if you step out of line. But I leave you with this lingering thought to chew on. As international organizations keep growing and setting up shop in our cities, how will our local courts continue to balance global diplomacy with our fundamental, everyday right to justice? Thanks so much for joining me today.